The hospital operator said, "Mr. Reyes, your father has died," and I kept the phone pressed to my ear until the metal chair scraped the concrete. Betrayal hit before the H. My first thought was not of grief but of papers I had never seen and decisions I had not made. I had stayed late to close month-end ledgers. The factory had clipped to my belt, my father's worn leather watch cold under my palm. A fluorescent bulb hummed above the desk. I set the receiver down with a hand that trembled once and then steadied in habit. Within 4 sentences the problem stood flat and sharp. Henry Reyes was gone, and the company papers on my desk would change who ate next month. That certainty forced my mouth to shape plans before my chest finished registering loss. I pushed back from the desk and walked the dark hall to the shop floor because people wait in spaces where the machines still say they are needed. Machine lights stuttered in rows. I ran my fingers along a conveyor rail on the way, feeling the oil grit under the pad of my thumb. I told Omar the bare facts first because the foreman reads numbers and then decides how to act. "Omar," I said, "Dad's gone." The hospital called. Omar's hand tightened around his clipboard. Maria came behind him with the coffee pot still warm. The morning crowd gathered fast, not because they wanted news, but because they wanted someone to answer for what came next. "Marcus, what does this mean for payroll?" Omar jaw set. "Marcus, who called?" Maria added, voice quick. I could hear the assembly line rhythm change when men and women stopped to listen. I did not have a plan. I had a ledger, a desk lamp, and the smell of machine oil in my jacket. I felt the first emotional shift then, shock folding into responsibility. So I said what felt like the only honest thing I'd done to know yet. "I'm going to the office, stay on the floor, keep work moving. I'll tell you what I find." Saying it made the shift concrete. I moved from stunned son into acting manager. By sunrise the rumor had teeth. People hovered by the time clock. Maria, who had kept the shop's calendars for 15 years, organized 2 rows of chairs and pushed me forward. I stood in the central work bay with a coffee in my hand I hadn't drunk and read to them what I had been told. Henry Reyes had died. I had been named the point of contact until the lawyers made the announcement. Faces closed or opened against the news, some blank, some wet, some furious, and in each face I saw what my father had meant to this place. After the short briefing, Omar remained at my shoulder, Maria beside me, both still asking for specifics. The second emotional shift came as pressure. The group's need pressed against my lack of information and made indecision dangerous. Elena arrived in the afternoon with a slim black portfolio and a posture that said she had handled estates more than once. She wore a plain navy jacket, hair pinned tight, and shoes that clicked on the office tile, "Marcus Reyes." She asked, then showed the paperwork without theatrics. "I'm Elena Morales. I'm handling your father's estate and the company's files. There are clauses we need to review." I put the coffee cup down and held the folder open. She laid out a will, a memo about a pending offer, and a short sealed letter addressed to me. Her voice stayed even. "This changes payroll in the short term. We should talk privately." Elena's arrival produced another external event. Legal reality folded into the morning's emotion and lowered the temperature in the room. We moved to my manager's office, where ledgers leaned against the wall like old, honest witnesses. Elena opened the document marked offer terms and began to explain the clauses in legal shorthand. She read aloud as I followed the numbers on the ledger's ruled pages. The will increased my salary and stipulated control over the company's operations on a temporary basis, but a reserved payout line was tied to a prospective buyer's milestone. "Marcus, Elena, there is a hold on funds that releases only if you accept the buyer's terms." Her eyes lifted to mine. "If you refuse, the buyer can withdraw and the company will remain in a precarious position." Elena named consequences. Her voice was a tool set that forced me to choose. I went back to the accounts room because numbers are less slippery than feelings. Omar came with me. Maria stayed near the phones. We pulled ledgers from the shelves and checked entries while Elena paged through bank statements. My hands moved, flipping pages, erasing figures, aligning columns. I could feel my jaw tighten as I traced a sequence of transfers. The workers on the floor tracked our movements. You could hear the distanced hum of the presses like a background heartbeat. I felt anger then, an emotion that pushed past simple hurt. How had Henry agreed to mortgage the factory I had spent my adulthood protecting? Anger focused my hands. Marcus, there's an account here I don't recognize. Omar. He pointed at a penciled entry and then at a stamped agreement folded inside the ledger. This looks like a reserved payout. Who signed this? His voice kept to short, practical syllables. Omar, look at page 49. There's a buyer clause tied to assets as collateral, I replied, feeling my skin go tight. We argued without theatrics. We can let them take jobs. Omar demanded. We can risk payroll for some outside investor. Maria from the doorway. Elena interjected with legal facts and a deadline. The buyer expects an answer within 7 days. They will not wait indefinitely. The argument had 6 short exchanges, quick and heated. Names moved the lines so everyone stayed oriented. This confrontation changed the shape of our choices. It forced me from reaction into a defensive plan. I sat at the ledger table leaning on the metal and read the sealed letter my father had left for me. His handwriting was slanted, ink faded at the edges, and he had folded the page into fourths. The letter praised loyalty and told me to look at the books before I made promises. It also contained a line I had not expected. A note that he had negotiated a hard bargain with an outside buyer to secure short-term liquidity. The words were precise and had no apology. Reading them produced a new mixture of grief and accusation. I put the letter down and rubbed the watch at my wrist. The skin there had a faint score where my thumb pressed. That action, rubbing the watch, showed the emotions moving under my skin without naming them. A small discovery turned into a mini cliffhanger. While tracing the ledger's folio numbers, I found a stamped agreement tucked between pages. Reserved payout to A0 Holdings upon acceptance. I stopped and turned the paper under the lamp. The ink was dry, the signature block filled with a name I did not recognize. I felt a cold, pragmatic fear. If Acero exercised their clause, layoffs would follow. I left the paragraph there and stepped into the next, hands still on the page, because the discovery forced the chapter inward. It reframed everything Henry had done as a choice that asked me to betray a community or bargain with their futures for cash. When I brought the stamped agreement to Elena, she did not look surprised. She only slid the packet across the table and said, "He arranged an option." It's been active for 9 months. Her tone lacked melodrama. Marcus, this is a lever. The buyer will want control and will require approval. The reserved payout finances their approach. Omar leaned in until his forearm hit the ledger's edge. So Henry signed us into selling our own jobs. He asked, so it looks, Elena. Her calm precision provoked a fresh turn from anger toward action. I felt my thoughts narrow into a plan to stall, to buy time for alternatives. The emotion shifted again, this time from accusation to deliberate problem solving. We called an emergency meeting and sat around the conference table with the assembly's schedule posted behind Maria. I told them plainly what was in the packet. We have a clause tied to a buyer. I won't sign anything today. Elena will open negotiations and buy time. Omar, keep production steady and don't answer external calls about a sale. Maria, keep the staff notices factual and short. Elena pressed a list of immediate legal steps into my hand and underlined items with a black pen. You can delay the acceptance, she said. There are procedural reviews and a required board consultation. I can ask for an extension. But you have to show good faith steps. The crew responded with a mix of relief and skepticism. Omar, Marcus, we need guarantees for payroll. Don't let them sell us out. I promised to fight out loud, because breaking that promise would cost me their trust. That evening I went to the accounts room with only the ledger and Henry's letter for company. The loading bay doors were open to dusk and the sky threw gold through the high windows. I unfolded the extra work shirt Henry had left in a drawer, fabric thin now from years of heat and machine grease, and saw the small initials stitched on the cuff. I imagined him standing where I was, hands on the rail, deciding terms that would keep the business alive at the cost of people he protected. My hands trembled. I buttoned the cuff slowly. The final beat of the chapter arrives here not as a tidy resolution but as a concrete choice. I would stall the buyer and seek another path, and that choice would cost time, money, and sleep. I wrote an instruction sheet for Alina with specific steps. Call the escrow officer, request an audit, and delay the acceptance while we pursued refinancing options. I handed the paper to her at the office door. Alina, buy us time, I said. Alina, find any path that doesn't give us zero control overnight. She looked at the paper, then at me, and said, I'll manage the deadline. Expect a response within 5 business days. Her words set a measurable window. That was a decision enacted in law and calendar, not a feeling. Omar patted my shoulder. Marcus, we'll all be ready to work whatever hours you need, he said. His practical pledge was a kind of vow that required concrete follow-through. I left the office to walk the perimeter of the factory. Maria called out to me from where she was pinning a notice to the bulletin board. Marcus, people are asking if payroll will change now, she said. Tell them we are delaying any commitments until we know more. I took a breath and then walked to the loading bay. The dusk made the metal doors look darker, and the warm rimlight from the interior lights threw my own shadow long across the concrete. I folded Henry's old work shirt with the careful motions I'd learned watching him fold his clothes after a long shift. Each fold felt like an accounting entry. This is duty, this is history, this is price. I buttoned the cuff and smoothed the fabric across my palm. The ledger's numbers and Alina's legal lines would shape the coming days, but in that moment my promise was physical. I would not sign away jobs without trying a different path. The last small event of the chapter was the sound of the back gate sliding closed and the faint click of the lock, a concrete punctuation. I set the folded shirt on a crate where the light would fall on it and left it there as if leaving a marker. That marker was a private vow without a speech. I had changed my role from a man who keeps the machines running to one who must keep people fed, and the cost of that decision would be paid in meetings, phone calls, and nights without sleep. I stepped back into the office and turned the overhead lamp down, leaving the shirt lit on the crate, the ledger closed beside it, and the sealed letter folded into my pocket. The chapter closes with that crate and the folded shirt under the bay light, an action, a visible object, a decision placed where employees could see it in the morning. I did not resolve the bias clause. I resolved to resist it, to stall and to seek alternatives. The concrete last sound is a metal door settling and a distant machine starting up for a night shift. I walked out into the cooler air and felt the watch at my wrist, the leather worn where my father's skin had touched it for years. I counted the tasks I had given Alina and the names of the people who depended on me, Omar, Maria, the press operators, and then I set the next morning's plan in the ledger. The evening ended on the plain fact of a folded shirt on a crate and a list of legal steps in Alina's handwriting waiting on my desk. The payroll printout hit the conference table like an accusation. Miguel shoved it across the lacquered metal and said, "Look at this, Marcus." I leaned in and saw my deposit listed at twice the usual figure. Suspicion tightened my jaw before grief did. I had not expected money to arrive like evidence. "Miguel, where did this come from?" I asked and pushed the paper back toward him. The staff at the long table were waiting with questions I did not have answers for yet. Samir stood with his arms folded and the grip of foreman tension in his hands. Clara rubbed her temple and did not look at me. The issue was simple and enormous. A sudden pay change tied to my name meant decisions that could either protect the factory or break it. I thought of the hospital operator's voice from the night before. "Mr. Reyes, your father has died." That sentence had hollowed out the week and left me working through inventory and grief at the same time. Now, with the ledger on the table, the loss felt joined at the hip with business paper. The immediate problem was clear. Someone had altered the payroll or had issued a directive. Someone had put my name at the center. Miguel tapped the corner of the printout with a pen. "We printed payroll twice by mistake." "No." The bank sent us a stamped notice. He put a sealed envelope on the table, the kind of envelope lawyers use. Thick, the kind that smells faintly of ink and courier glue. Miguel's hand trembled the way it does when numbers stop making sense. My suspicion shifted into something sharper. I suspected someone had used my position as leverage. Clara, Evelyn's on her way. She has a legal stamp on that envelope. Her voice pulled the room taut. People who worked on the floor had eyes that searched for the fallout first. Samir cleared his throat and said, "If management is suddenly making more money, what does that mean for us down here?" He my name twice in his question, as if the syllables could hold me accountable. The conference room felt too small. Stack lights from the line blurred through the high windows. I kept my hand on my father's leather watch, the strap worn thin where my wrist had caused a gloss over the years. My fingers rubbed the leather the way they always did when I tried to steady my voice. Anger came next, quick and dry. Not at the men who had gathered, but at the idea that Henry, my father, might have set conditions I hadn't known about. The first external event happened inside a minute. McGill pushed the stamped bank notice and the sealed envelope toward me. "This came with instructions," he said. "The firm that handled Henry's affairs. There's a note attached." His sentence rose into a question and hung apart from the others. Evelyn Cortez arrived with a soft knock on the reception glass and a folder under her arm. She wore the firm black suit she always did, and the kind of shoes you notice by their silence. Evelyn placed the codicil on the table and opened it with a measured thumb. "Mr. Reyes," she said, "this codicil names you to a new role. There are compensation clauses linked to certain corporate decisions." She read the paragraph aloud in a voice that weighed every comma. My suspicion dissolved into a slow, hot disbelief. "What decisions?" I asked. Evelyn pointed at a clause and did not read it with theatrics. "Approvals for asset sales, restructuring measures, and transfer authorizations," she said. "The doubled compensation is conditional on your signature approving those items." Her eyes stayed level with mine. Clara swallowed and looked at Samir. Samir's jaw tightened. Lola, the union rep, had come in with half the shop floor crowd clustered at the doorway. She stepped forward, hands spread like she was holding the room together. "You can take our lines, Marcus. Lola, you can sign away people's jobs for a salary increase." Her voice was an action, direct, public, demanding. I could see the shop workers' faces from where I stood. The tension in their shoulders told me they had already imagined pink slips. My suspicion shifted again, this time into fear for them. I said, "Lola, Samir, listen. No one told me anything about selling the lines." My palms were dry. I spoke fast so there would be no pause where anger could lodge. Samir stepped forward. "Marcus, you know what rumors do. If the boss's son starts signing papers, people will reconfigure their lives. We need guarantees." He my name 3 times across the next sentence. His rhythm was blunt. People wanted names attached to safety. McGill returned to the ledger and flipped through pages. "There's a line item here marked restructuring with Henry's initials. It appears in last month's ledgers." He tapped the exact row with his pen. The discovery felt like scraping at a scab. It revealed a plan I hadn't known existed and suggested my father had written his intentions into accounting code. I asked, "Why would Henry plan restructuring?" "He always said this place was our family." My voice came out rougher than I intended. I remembered Henry's hands, calloused, certain, and the way he used to tilt his chin when he decided something. Those concrete memories stopped me from turning everything into blame. Evelyn closed the codicil and slid a folded note across to me. It was in my father's handwriting. Firm, slanted, with the brown smudge near the bottom where he had always wiped his pen. My fingers hesitated before unfolding it. The note read like instruction. That the compensation could be used to ensure my cooperation. That certain signatures would trigger transfers described in the enclosed documents. The handwriting was Henry's, and the content cut through me. For a moment I reopened the night before in my head. The operator's sterile voice, the fluorescent corridor in the hospital, where everything had smelled of bleach and paper. I had stayed late to close month, end ledgers, because accounting is where I always went when I needed to feel useful. The ledger was where my life and my father's life had overlapped. Now the ledger itself contained a demand. I looked at Evelyn and said, "You knew this." The timeline tightened. "You put this into effect." Evelyn's voice stayed professional. The codicil was filed. The bank notice followed. I handled the paperwork after Mir. Ray's instructions. She paused and tapped the folder. It's legal and binding unless challenged in probate court. Her last phrase landed like a mechanical hammer. Samir barked, so he set us up to be sold off. He and Lola exchanged looks. The argument that followed was rapid and rough. You tell us the truth, Marcus, Lola demanded. If this is about preserving the company, tell us how you plan to keep people employed. Her lines were short, direct. Samir, Lola, calm down, I said, because I needed time to think. Though my voice did not sound calm, I didn't know about the line item. I will not sign anything tonight. I will not trade jobs for my salary. My sentence was a choice acted out loud. At that we had a quick, sharp exchange that felt like an argument with more than one speaker pressing at me. Marcus, you can delay. There are clauses with timelines. Evelyn, what timelines? Certain boards convene next week. Approvals must be processed, then call the meetings. Tell them no signatures until we consult the workers. Samir, we need a vote, Lola added. That's 4 lines thrown back and forth in the span of 30 seconds. The room became a short courtroom. I could feel the emotion shift again. Suspicion moving to anger, and anger folding into responsibility. I went back to my small office beside the production floor. The lights were low. A single bulb above the desk threw a ring on the ledgers. Miguel followed with a printed set of the pages. We cross-referenced numbers and a concrete discrepancy appeared. A transfer account linked to an outside firm with Henry's initials and a sequence of proposed asset movements. The evidence did not guess. It listed warehouses, account numbers, dates. This doesn't read like a plan to protect the workers. Miguel, flat and careful, it reads like the sale of assets. He tapped the transfer line again. Look, warehouse 3 to a holding company. Inventory moving out scheduled in 30 days. My hands found the factory it clipped to my belt. I felt the cool metal and the small weight of responsibility carried on a plastic strap. I opened the metal filing cabinet where Henry kept his personal notes. Inside I found a folded folder marked in his handwriting. The label said, for Marcus. The note inside was a private explanation, but not what I expected. Henry wrote that he feared the company might not survive market pressures and that he had drawn contingency plans. He had believed that certain sales could free capital to save core operations. He had also written a direct line that startled me. Use the doubled compensation to ensure your cooperation if you want to lead willingly. Anger rose again, this time at the man who had been my model. For a second I felt betrayal so sharp it translated into a physical heat in my face. My fingers curled around the paper until the edges dented. I slammed the file closed and called Evelyn into the office. What did he mean by ensure your cooperation? I asked. I kept my voice low so the building wouldn't hear the split between son and founder. Evelyn held my gaze and said, the clause links your pay to your sign-off authority. It means if you approve the listed transactions, your salary remains as set. If you refuse, compensation reverts. She balanced professionalism with a hint of apology. A new external event occurred then. Samir burst into the office with 2 shop foremen behind him. Marcus, people are talking about layoffs. We want to stand for it. We need a plan now. He stood too close to me and pointed at the ledger. His finger on the page felt like an accusation and a plea. We argued for several minutes in the office. The argument contained quick exchanges meant to force clarity. Marcus, what will you do? Lola, her voice carrying from the conference room. Marcus, they expect answers. Samir. Evelyn reminded us, legal intervals are tight. Probate begins consolidation procedures soon. I heard my own heartbeat and knew I had to make a decision that night, if not to sign, then to set the path. I could feel the emotion shift into determination, but determination without information would be a gamble with people's livelihoods. I requested a pause and asked everyone to step back to the conference room. I said, we will not sign anything tonight. McGill me the full ledger history of the past 6 months. Evelyn prepare copies of every codicil and linked consent. Samir, Lola bring a list of priorities from the floor, who cannot be relocated, who must remain. The directives were simple. I wrote them down on a post-it and stuck it to the ledger as if pinning a small order to the future. We resumed with a smaller group. Evelyn handed over a sealed envelope with the firm's stamp and a copy of the codicil page that mentioned conditional compensation. McGill spread a ledger sheet across the table with the restructuring line highlighted. The room's air was tight with counting breaths and the clack of coffee mugs. A mid-chapter twist arrived when McGill announced that a third-party company listed in the ledger had been incorporated under a name tied to an old friend of Henry's, someone Henry had never liked to discuss in public meetings. That revelation reframed the ledger from a dry plan into a potential personal arrangement. You mean he set up the sale with someone he trusted off the books? Samir, it looks that way. McGill, then why would he write to me like that? I asked. My voice sounded smaller. The twist made betrayal more personal, a handoff rather than a strategic inevitability. Lola, for a concrete promise. Marcus, names and promises. Will you refuse to sign until we know the buyer and the terms? Her tone was not mild now. I said, yes, I will refuse to sign without full disclosure an agreement that protects jobs. I will not be the man who trades people's pay for my comfort. The words were both a pledge and a boundary. Saying them aloud shifted the room's energy. Evelyn leaned forward. That will trigger legal challenges. It may expose the estate to dispute. But you have the right to refuse. Her statement read like a door opening onto a new set of legal options. The climax came in the temporary boardroom we had cleared from an assembly table. Samir and Lola demanded protections for the workers. Evelyn read the binding clause in the codicil and made the linkage plain. My salary, my signature, and the asset sales were correlative. Accusations flew. The workers in the doorway raised their voices. In the middle of the meeting, a line of rapid dialogue snapped across the table. Evelyn, did Henry ever tell you his intention? I asked, only that he wanted the company to survive. He left the rest in writing. She answered, then what does survival mean if it costs people jobs? Samir, Marcus, what will you decide now? Lola, I felt pressure from every angle. The emotion turned to a hard, nervous clarity. I would not simply be moved by the ledger or the doubled deposit. The ledger was a lever. I had to decide whether to use it to pry open the company or to wedge it closed. The debate accelerated into a short, heated exchange, 3 to 6 quick lines where we tested one another's resolve and legal options. We can take this to court. Evelyn, we can stall signatures and demand an audit. McGill suggested we can hold a vote with the workers. Lola, or you can sign and accept the terms. Samir snapped. The cadence of words hit like blows. Each line shifted the probability of outcomes. I kept my hand on the worn leather watch again, feeling the strap's thin resistance. That contact grounded me when talk threatened to unmoor everything. At the height of the argument, I made a decision. I would not sign the proposed transfers without a complete hearing and a worker-backed plan to protect jobs. It was not a legal solution in itself. It was a moral line drawn where my father's handwriting had tried to place coercion. The meeting broke into smaller groups. McGill and I stayed late in my office cross-referencing ledgers once more. He found an accounting code entry that suggested funds had already been earmarked for a holding company transfer. The discovery acted like a cliffhanger. If funds had moved, some transactions might be irreversible. We stared at the numbers and at one another. If money already moved, reversing it will be messy. McGill, then we find where it went and who authorized the move. I said. My voice was a flat decision. We made a plan. McGill would trace bank transfers and contact the bank liaison at first light. Evelyn would contact the probate clerk and request an expedited review of the codicil conditions. Samir and Lola organized a worker council to compile priorities and to prepare for an urgent vote. We scheduled no signatures. I walked out alone toward the loading bay as dawn started to thin the night. The factory exhaled the smell of oil and cold metal. I held the folded ledger page and Henry's note in my hand. The last shift had emptied into quiet crates along the dock. My emotion in that last stretch moved into quiet resolve. I would uncover the full intent of the documents and find a way that might spare the workers. At the edge of the dock, I pressed my hand against the cool steel of the loading bay door and felt the factory's pulse slow beneath me. I folded the ledger into my jacket and pulled the leather watch strap tighter. I turned and reached for the door handle. A voice from the threshold cut across the dawn. "Marcus, there's more." The lawyer slid the sealed will and an envelope across the table and said, "Open it, Marcus." Suspicion tightened my jaw the way a belt tightens when you reach for a drawer. The word had nowhere soft to land. Elena sat forward, fingers flat on her briefcase, and the late morning light from the narrow office window threw the paper's edge into a white line. The sealed will was clean, the addendum attached with a legal staple. The envelope had my name written in my father's blocky hand. I felt suspicion first, then a quick, mechanical rehearsal of obligations, payroll, insurance, the machines, and then the H that came after the hospital call. The hospital operator's voice still lived in the back of my throat. "Reyes, your father has died." I kept that voice folded into the way I handled the envelope. I slid the seal free with the heel of my hand. Elena watched my face like she was reading currency. The will named the company trustees and divided assets in the way Henry had always done, with lists, page numbers, and a margin note on shipping routes. The addendum was a single paragraph with a clause that changed who held fiscal authority and placed binding conditions on corporate control. It allocated me specific managerial authority while opening the door to outside investors if I agreed to certain terms. My eyes snagged on a phrase about binding acceptance and a timeline that required an acceptance or rejection within 30 days. I swallowed. My throat felt dry. The city noise behind the window sounded like someone pressing on a tin roof. "Marcus." "Elena, this clause gives you operational authority immediately, but it also contains conditions that allow the estate to offer equity to outside partners if you sign their acceptance." Her voice was level. Her eyes were not. "They'll push for investors fast." "Javier will want that." I nodded because I had to move something other than my head. The file slid like a handoff. Suspicion shifted into anger in the span of one breath. Anger at the idea that my father's paper could hand the company over. Anger at myself for thinking about money while my father lay in a drawer at the funeral home. "Henry wrote this?" I asked. Elena tapped the signature. "Yes." Henry signed it 2 weeks before he was admitted. He left a handwritten note filed under correspondence. That note, a small folded sheet with ink smudged at the corner, had the kind of directness Henry favored. He'd written one line I could not properly read at first. "Marcus, this will force you to choose what matters." The line landed like a geological shift. A test, then. Did Henry anticipate me or arrange the timing himself? Doubt rose and fell against my ribs, doubt about motive, about whether I'd been steered. I left Elena's office with the file under my arm and moved through the plant like someone carrying glass. Outside the office, the shop floor smelled of oil and coffee, hot metal and the sore tang of welding flux. Miguel saw me in the doorway and dropped the wrench he was holding as if the sound could wake me up. "Marcus," he said, sharp. We saw the memo. "People are talking," Miguel's voice carried. Workers looked up from benches and machines. I felt their eyes land the way sunlight hits a windshield. My suspicion turned to responsibility. Whatever Henry had written was now my problem. "Tell me what you heard," I said. Miguel shoved a payroll printout into my hands. The paper was warm from the printer. "Look at this, Marcus. Your salary doubled the day your father died. People are saying you took advantage." I remembered that printout from late the previous night, how it had arrived like an accusation across the conference table. The doubled deposit stared at me now in black numbers. I could feel the ledger's weight like a physical thing in my palm. "Miguel," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I didn't authorize that." I looked up and met his eyes. "So who did?" he asked. "Because our families work here. You know that if outsiders take over, our benefits change. Javier will cut corners." His fear was concrete. A cut in shifts, a change in health contributions, a different schedule posted on the break room board. I could see the corners of his knuckles whitening where he held the paper. Doubt folded into anger and then into calculation. "I'll call Elena back," I said. "We'll find out where that deposit came from." The board meeting came 2 hours later. The glass conference room thrummed with the sound of shoes on tile and laptops booting. Javier sat at the head of the table with a legal pad and the practiced look of a man who liked numbers because they behaved. Sophia from Ha had taken a chair near the door. Her hands were folded as if in prayer. Elena clicked a slide. The headline on the first spreadsheet read, "Estate Terms and Implications, Marcus. Javier started, your father's will is generous, but the addendum opens a path for investor equity. With our current debt load, outside capital could stabilize operations." He placed his hands together. "It's practical." Sophia's reply was immediate. "Practical for who, Javier? Our people live on these schedules. Changes to benefits affect daycare mortgages. These aren't numbers on a sheet for them." Her voice did not tremble. She kept using names. Miguel's team, Rosa from assembly, Joe's on maintenance. The room tightened. Elena explained the timeline again, pointing at the clause that required action within 30 days. The estate could solicit terms and that I, as the named managerial authority, would be the contact. My role was not ceremonial. My signature would signal acceptance. That was the spine of the problem. The air in the room felt like it had been measured and then cut. Javier leaned in. "Marcus, accepting investors could bring capital, new machinery, higher margins. Why would you refuse?" "Because," I said, and the word started low, "because I don't sign away people's benefits without seeing what the contract says first." My voice might have surprised them. "Because Henry built this plant around payrolls, not stock charts." My hand found the edge of the ledger in my bag and gripped it until the corners whitened. They debated in numbers. Elena read clauses aloud. Javier spoke of solvency. Sophia kept returning to employees by name. Miguel arrived halfway through that exchange and did not bother to hide his impatience. "Marcus," he said, taking no airs, "we need you to say what you'll do. People are scared. Say something." His line was short, sharp, 3 words. I met Javier's gaze and felt the room narrow down to 2 paths. Accept and bring investment but risk altering worker contracts, or reject and face potential legal fights and immediate financial strain. I felt my father's hands in my memory, the way he had folded a bolt of cloth or shut a ledger with a decisive motion. The choice felt like a hinge. After the meeting, I went to the archive because Henry kept things where he thought they should be: metal boxes, ledgers in chronological order, a glass jar with safety pins near a stack of old invoices. Miguel followed, silent until the archive door closed behind us. I lit the dim task lamp at the center table. Dust rose in thin lines over the files when I opened the box with personal written in block letters. I found the folded letter there, the one Elena had mentioned, but I also found another note tucked under a payroll sheet dated 2 weeks earlier. A short inventory of transactions, and the phrase, "contingency deposit." My fingers shook when I flattened the paper. The new note suggested that doubled salary had been rotated temporarily through an estate account to cover back pay for a faulty punch. Clock system Henry had refused to replace last year. It read, plainly, "Hold this until Marcus decides." That sentence changed how I understood the payprint. The double deposit might not have been theft or a test. It could have been my father fixing a problem he thought I might ignore. The twist pushed against my suspicion and pried open a new question. Had Henry arranged these numbers to force my hand or to protect employees from an accounting oversight? My mind sped through possible motives. My face felt cool as metal. "Miguel," I said, holding the paper up, "this says contingency deposit. It might be for back pay." Miguel's jaw tightened. "So Henry did something for us. Or he set us up so someone could say you took advantage." He the last part like a dare. We folded the papers back into a box and shut the lid as if that could keep choices from shifting. An external event arrived in the form of a loud knock on the archive door. "Javier, he would not accept a delay." "Marcus, we can sit on this." The bank called. He stepped into the dim light, and his suit seemed too sharp for the smell of oil. The confrontation on the shop floor came at dusk. The board returned in force. Employees gathered near the loading bay like a small crowd at a neighborhood meeting. Sophia moved among them, naming people and calming them where she could. Javier stood with a folder of projected balances. Elena stood beside me. Miguel kept his arms folded. "Javier," I said loud enough for the group, We can accept investor terms sight unseen. We need guarantees for benefits. Tell me what clause protects the employees. I felt my voice move from calculation to command. Javius' response was quick. Marcus, you don't get to bargain that away. If we bring in capital, we stabilize payroll for the long term. He smiled like a man who already signed. You don't get to decide that for everyone, Miguel. You don't get to decide that for everyone. Sophia stepped forward. Sophia, people here have families. We need clarity. She kept her sentences short. A list of names, a list of consequences. The crowd shifted. Some faces looked relieved to hear Sophia use names. Others looked scared. The argument tightened into rapid exchanges. Elena and Javier went back and forth about liabilities and fiduciary duty. I heard Elena say, Elena, we need a plan that protects current contracts. Javier answered, Javier, we can guarantee everything without capital. Miguel cut in 3 quick lines, each one a joke. Miguel, then Volt. Mig, then choose. Mig, done. T-pawn us off. Those 3 rapid lines landed like hammer strikes. An employee named Rosa spoke up with a single sentence. Rosa, if you sell, my son's daycare changes. That line reframed the arithmetic into the concrete ledger of life. My chest tightened. The push from employees shifted the argument from numbers to naming. I could see the faces I had grown up with among the benches. I thought of the payroll printout again, and the note Henry left. The twist of the hidden letter and the payroll note now tied together. This was not just about money, it was about a method Henry had set up to force a choice. I felt both anger and a strange clarity. The board expected me to choose a path that favored solvency. My father had left a paper that made that choice personal. The climax arrived under harsh industrial lights. The crowd hushed as I stepped to the center of the factory floor. Machines ticked on in the background. Someone turned off the radio so my voice would not compete. I placed the file on a metal crate so I could reach it easily. Elena and Javier watched from opposite sides. Sophia stood where she could touch the edge of Miguel's sleeve. I will not sign an acceptance that sells control without written guarantees for current employee contracts, I said. I laid out the terms I would accept. A written covenant that preserved existing benefits for 5 years, oversight from a nominated employee's trustee, and a phased investment model tied to specific equipment upgrades. I heard murmurs. Javier's mouth tightened. You can be serious, Javier, you can be serious. Marcus, I am serious. Miguel, stepping forward, Miguel. If this is about Henry Marcus, you know he'd want us protected. Elena adjusted her glasses. Elena, this will provoke legal challenges, but it is defensible. She had the look of a lawyer mapping the outside lines. Javier stared at the file, then at me. The board members' faces shifted from the polished calm of commerce to something like calculation and then threat. Javier, if you refuse, we'll file injunctions and press the estate. His voice carried a legal weight. We will force a sale if necessary. That was the lever. The threat of legal action meant an immediate risk to the company. Sudden expenses, shaken credit lines, vendors unsure of payment. The employees around us convulsed with a mix of relief and fear. My decision to prioritize contracts had just set a legal engine in motion. The emotional shift now went from resolve to a slow, cold fear not of losing money, but of losing the plant itself if the legal fight escalated badly. I spoke then with the kind of clarity that comes from naming what you fear, then sue. I said, sue us. Take the case to court. But we will not sign away people's livelihoods without written protection. My words landed like a door closing. There was a beat of silence so loud I could hear the machines click. Elena looked at me like she'd seen a step in a stair she hadn't known existed before. Javier's jaw worked. Sophia repeated employees' names. Miguel's shoulders eased in a way that made the plant exhale. The legal engines started turning. Phones rang. Immediate fallout followed. Javier left the floor in a flurry of phone calls and terse goodbyes. 2 board members walked out intent on legal counsel. Elena stayed, and she and I spent the next hour drafting a framework that could be lodged as a provisional covenant. Elena, we'll file an injunction to block forced investor acceptance while we negotiate the covenant. Her words moved like a plan into shape. Employees clustered in small groups. Rosa touched her son's name written on a lunchbox and smiled once. Miguel put a hand on my shoulder. Miguel, you did the right thing. He did not sound like a man who wanted litigation, but he wanted protection. The twist I had promised myself, the way Henry Snotes had rearranged the meaning of the doubled deposit, kept unfolding. Elena uncovered another line in the estate correspondence. Henry had explicitly anticipated outside pressure and had written a clause that made the manager's decision pivotal. He had not merely tested me. He decreated a mechanism to force confrontation. Whether he had done it to punish or to prepare, I could not say. What I could do was act. Later that night I sat in my dim office with the overhead lamp low and the city lights smeared into a pool on the desk metal. The lapel pin that had been in my father's jacket sat like a coin beside the worn leather watch on my wrist. I took the pin off and set it on the desk. My fingers kept rubbing the watch band until the rhythm steadied me. I opened the file again and read the covenants we had proposed, line by line. Elena had made them tight and legal. They would buy time and force a negotiation. The fear that had arrived after my decision eased into a cautious reserve. I thought of Henry at his desk, hands calloused, stopping at a ledger and making a line. I thought of the hospital operator's voice and the payroll printout on Miguel's bench. Suspicion had carried me into action, anger had pushed me to choose, and now resolve held me steady enough to plan. Those were the emotion shifts that had moved the day. At the end, before I left the office, I set my father's lapel pin on top of the watch and whispered a promise that was more habit than prayer. I won't let them sell the place out from under the people. I closed the drawer. The final event of the day arrived as a concrete knock on my office door. Sophia. With a list of names needing immediate clarification on benefits and a child's school enrollment form requiring tomorrow's signature. I took the papers from her hand and signed where necessary. My action tied me back into the practical chain Henry had always respected. Signatures, stamps, forms. The night outside the high window was the gold-teal wash of the city reflected off the warehouse roofs. I turned off the desk lamp and placed the pin against the watch one more time. The warehouse lights cycled overhead, then dimmed for the night. The decision had been made. The immediate legal storm would follow, but I had anchored the plant to a promise, to a piece of paper that named names and preserved benefits for now. When I closed the office door behind me, I felt the ache of exhaustion and a small, steady certainty. Choices had consequences, and so did inaction. I left the lapel pin and the watch where they would be found, a pair of objects that belonged to 2 generations of a company built on hands and ledgers. The warehouse lights cut to black behind me, and the metal door slid shut with the same finality as a signature. Someone shoved a payroll sheet into my hands and shouted, "Marcus, explain this doubled pay!" The paper was warm from someone's pocket. Suspicion hit first. I felt it as a stiff knot behind my throat, and I rubbed my father's watch against my palm without thinking. Voices rose around me, Rosa on my left, Miguel right behind her, and the fluorescent lights hummed above the machines. I could not step back. I set my feet on the concrete and met the group with the kind of steady, practical voice that used to stop arguments on the floor. "Miguel," I said, and kept my hand flat on the desk where the ledger had been dropped. "Walk me through this." I did not ask for calm. I asked for facts. That pulled a few heads closer. The air smelled of oil and coffee and something metallic from the presses. Rosa jabbed a finger at the top of the sheet. "Marcus, payroll shows 200% for half the crew. People are asking if the company's been sold. They want to know if there will be jobs tomorrow." Her voice held a tired edge. She had worked under my father for 20 years. I had to answer her. I opened my mouth and the wordless list of things pushed past my jaw. My father's call to the hospital, the lawyer's sealed envelope, the ledger I had closed at month end. I stacked those facts in my head like tools. "We are not sold," I said. "I don't have a sale to announce tonight. Tell me who saw the payroll." I kept my voice short because every extra word might turn to rumor. Miguel stepped forward. Miguel, Marcus, Lewis called his sister crying, said his deposit hit at double. People are scared. They want the truth. He shoved the paper closer. Why did you get paid twice? He demanded. McGill, sit down and let me look at the bank runs, I said. My fingers felt bulky on the page. The doubled deposit looked like a stranger's handwriting. My throat closed. Suspicion pushed me toward the ledger first and toward my father's private office after. The ledger had promised numbers I didn't expect. The payroll had hit like an accusation in Chapter 2. That memory was a flat bruise under the current noise. Rosa folded her arms. Marcus, if the company goes to someone else, what happens to us? Her question landed like a request and a threat at once. Those were the two forces I had sworn to hold apart. The legal obligations in a sealed will and the people who earned paycheck by paycheck here. I breathed and my jaw worked. I had to show action, not rhetoric. Rosa, Miguel, give me until morning. I will check every account. I will not let this company sell without a clear vote. I will answer you tomorrow on the floor in front of everyone, saying it made it real. Saying it put a limit on rumor. Outside the break room, the night kept the yard empty and the machines asleep. I walked the long corridor to my old keys and the private office Henry had kept locked. The door still smelled of his shirt sleeves and pipe tobacco even after the funeral. I thought of the hospital call again, the operator's voice, the hospital lights, the way the world folded into a timetable. That was how the day had started. Now I had to find what my father had left. The conference room meeting came at dawn. Elena and the lawyer stood with a folder thicker than it needed to be. Elena's coat had the same crisp line it had the day she negotiated the supplier contracts. She looked like someone who learned to hold her body still during fights. The lawyer pushed a page across the table. An urgent letter from Thomas Calder, an investor I had met once in passing. Marcus, Elena, voice flat. This came this morning. Calder wants immediate restructuring or he will submit a formal offer. He says he'll move fast. The board is asking for a decision in 24 hours. She placed the letter like a weight. He wants to rush a takeover, I said. I felt the second emotion shift, doubt becoming anger. I pressed my thumb into the worn leather of my father's watch. Who leaked the payroll? I asked. The lawyer did not meet my eye. We do not know. Calder's team hinted they had access to internal financials. If he files an offer, the board must respond. There is legal pressure on immediate governance change unless you act. His words were short, clinical. The threat was clear. Act fast and lose control or stall and risk a hostile bid. Elena folded her hands. Marcus, the will gives you authority but not unilateral time. The investor's lawyer cited a clause in a shareholder agreement. We need to make a public decision soon to protect the company from collapse or put us on stable footing for sale. She it as if she were weighing outcomes, not emotions. I stood, felt my knees ache with the weight of the day. Doubt tilted into a sharper edge. I left the conference room with the letter in my pocket and the lawyer's warning ringing behind me. Back in Henry's office, sunlight cut through the high windows in a hard line. I went straight for the ledger, numbers and notes that had been my father's way of talking when he avoided conversation. I flipped pages with quick, measured motions until a folded scrap fell out and hit the desk. It was a single page that had been tucked between payroll lines. A handwritten note in my father's cramped script and a ledger annotation I had never seen before. My hands tightened on the paper. The note said, Priority. People wages, secure work before profit shifts. HR exception. Only if legal force compels transfer. The handwriting looped in the places where my father had been angry or tired. I read it twice, then 3 times. The note was precise enough to matter in court. I felt a new tilt, clarity replacing the earlier fear. This was a contingency clause, something that could block a hurried sale. Elena came into the office without knocking. You found something? She asked. Yes, I said, and held the page so she could see the ink. He left a clause. She scanned it, and her face tightened. This changes leverage. Elena, if it's enforceable, we can contest Calder's timeline. But it's not formalized here. It's a note, Marcus. It will need corroboration. Her words turned the clarity into another set of decisions. Her voice carried calculation, the way she calmed machines into order. I felt suspicion morph into purpose. The second emotion shift happened. Purpose settled into a hollow of resolve. Find George, I said. If anyone knows the old hand's intent, it's him. He worked side by side with Henry for decades. If there's an unsigned note or a ledger mark he has seen, he can testify to intent. My decision came out as an action. George was in the warehouse office when I found him. He had oil under his fingernails and a rag in his back pocket. When he saw the paper, his mouth set. Marcus, George, your father and I argued about this for years. He wrote it, but he also wrote notes in margins when he meant something real. He me once, George, never sell while the men dunty have a plan. George's voice carried the blunt honesty of someone who had tied his life to the plant. Do you remember when he said it? I asked. I remember the morning he circled payroll and slammed the table with his fist. George, if they ever try to buy us for land or numbers and not people, they'll find me in the ledgers. George's memory matched the paper in my hand. That corroboration turned the note from a messy will scrap into a legal lever. Rosa called a shop, floor assembly that afternoon. The workers came in the cluster they always did, boots scuffing against the concrete and jackets folded over arms. Rosa stood at the front and looked at me with an expectation that felt like a physical weight. Marcus, Rosa, we want a promise. One of us must say it in front of everyone. Are you going to keep jobs? Are you going to sign a deal that promises our hours? Her voice had the narrowness of someone who had little margin and even less faith in promises. Rosa, I said. And I named the commitment I had already had in my head. I will not sign anything that dismisses employees without a process. I will return with a set of amended governance terms by evening. I will offer a public commitment to job preservation clauses. My sentence was short and arranged, so the workers could hear the action behind the words. Marcus. Words won't hold against a lawyer's brief, and the bank doesn't take promises. Miguel. He stepped forward. We need proof now. People are down to their last weeks. Tell us the plan now. Miguel's line of questioning pushed me to do more than declare a hope. He demanded a practical step. I felt the pressure of two realities. Calder's investors and my father's notes. The ledger had shifted the legal probability, but it did not close the deal. We needed a document, and we needed it fast. That afternoon an old friend produced proof. George returned with a small brown envelope and a second ledger page with a margin annotation in Henry's hand. He slapped them on the warehouse table in front of Elena and me. This was loose in his desk. George. He marked payroll and wrote secure wages on the side. He signed nothing, but the handwriting, it's his. Marcus. George did not try to dress the moment. He lifted a hand and pressed the paper flat. Elena put on reading glasses and turned the page slowly. Her mouth thinned. This is precise language. If we combine this with the estate notes and witness statements, we can file an emergency governance amendment. It won't stop legal action indefinitely, but it will force Calder to slow down and start a process. She looked at me as if measuring time. The evidence was the twist that changed how I understood earlier meetings. Calder's team had likely triggered the payroll rumor to force panic. The doubled pay had been a pressure point. That deliberate leak now read as a tactic. My suspicion shifted into a clearer accusation aimed at a hostile investor. That was a concrete reveal. It changed the direction of the fight. We scheduled a confrontation for dusk in the loading bay. Calder arrived with a small retinue and a lawyer who kept his hands folded like a closed brief. The loading bay had the low, open sky behind it and shipping containers stacked like silent witnesses. Thomas Calder stood with the city light on his jaw. Raise, Calder stepping forward. I offer you a generous number for the company. We will buy, restructure, and guarantee continuity for certain employees. Sign now and receive a payout that protects you and the family name. His voice was smooth. He named outcomes as if they were already achieved. He wanted the legal clock to beat out uncertainty. Thomas Calder, I said, you sent a letter and leaked payroll. You tried to create fear here. I felt my voice go cold with accusation. My fingers found the folded ledger in my jacket, and I placed it on the crate between us. Calder's lawyer unrolled a document. We have an offer that protects capital. If you refuse, we will proceed with a tender regardless. The board will be advised to consider our bid. Delay will cost employees if the plant shuts for legal review. The tactic was clear. Force a fast choice. George stepped to my side and produced his envelope. This is Henry's note, he said. He prioritized wages. He circled payroll. He meant to protect the people. You're not going to push us into a quick sale. George did not look at Calder. He looked at me and at the workers watching from the shadows. Calder smiled like a man who had cornered cattle. Gentlemen, legal counsel will weigh the note. That scrap of paper won't stop a formal offer if the board considers price superior to intent. You need to present a binding governance amendment today. Mick Rays, he turned toward my board allies and tried to cajole them with numbers. Elena moved when I needed her. We will draft an amended governance term that protects employees' positions for a set period and attaches a compensation reduction to the shares if sold improperly, she said. That will require the board's approval and your signatures. Calder. The language will be public and verifiable. Elena laid out the framework like a builder laying planks. Calder's expression did not move. He wanted a rapid contract. He wanted control that will take time, he said. Time allows markets to shift and value to fall. I cannot guarantee my current offer after a long process. His bargain was time for leverage. I felt the moment close into a single decision. The tension peaked, the loading bay at dusk, the stacked containers, our small group pressed between them. The workers watched from the shadows. The company's fate narrowed into legal sentences on a crate. I asked Elena to produce the best provisional text we could within the hour. She and our lawyer retreated into the small office adjoining the bay. George and Rosa walked the perimeter, voices low. The dusk light thinned to a gold-teal rim around the buildings, and the drum of far traffic came like a distant machine. Inside the office, Elena typed fast. Marcus, she said. This clause will require you to accept reduced immediate compensation and give a portion of voting control to a trust that enforces job preservation. You will sign, and we will record, and the board will have to vote under clearer legal terms. Her eyes held urgency. This will not be a guaranteed shield forever, but it will make a forced takeover expensive and legally messy. Calder may decide it's not worth the fight. I looked at the clause and then at the ledger page again. This was the choice laid out in the beats of my life. To accept personal sacrifice to keep the workforce intact, or to protect my own compensation and allow outside interests to remake the place Henry had built. The emotion shifted again, clarity became sacrifice, and sacrifice rounded into acceptance. At the desk, the lawyer read the provisional amendment aloud, so everyone could hear the concrete terms. When he finished, the room held its breath. Then Miguel spoke. Marcus, Miguel, voice quick. If you sign this now and give up a chunk of pay or control, will the jobs be safe? He did not ask for promises in the abstract. He for the mechanism. Miguel, yes, I said. The amendment places a binding trust with specific requirements to protect payroll and working hours for 18 months. It reduces my voting share and a portion of my compensation. It's in writing, verified and witnessable. I'm the one signing. My sentence was a practical guarantee. Rosa exhaled and wiped her palms on her jeans. Marcus, if you sign, we will stand with you. If you don't, we will fight. But we cannot keep the plant if the owners decide to empty it for a quick flip. She looked at me like a forewoman looking at the job itself. Calder stepped forward one last time. You can be noble, Rays, or you can be sensible. Money will secure the plant better than a troubling scrap of paper. Sign with me, and I'll promise continuity for those included in my plan. His offer tried to trade moral clarity for a polished contract. The board watched, measuring numbers and faces. Some faces wanted the offer. Others wanted the continuity Henry had scribbled. I set my pen down. I felt the weight in my palm and the watch's leather rubbing like a metronome against my wrist. The watch had belonged to Henry. It had wound through decades of decisions and had the small nick above the dial where a press had hit it years ago. I felt that history as a physical pressure. I signed the amendment. It did not feel like an heroic line. It felt like a deliberate, painful action. I ceded part of my pay and some voting control to the trust that Elena had constructed. I did not sign anything that gave Calder immediate ownership. I handed the amended document to the lawyer and told him to file it and call the board for a formal vote. Calder snarled and left with his retinue. He threatened legal action. He promised to make the process difficult. He would challenge the amendment's enforceability. Those were words that meant lawyers and delay, not immediate closure. That night we negotiated terms with the board in a session that ran longer than I expected. Some directors argued for price, others argued for continuity. Elena and George argued for intent and witness. In the end, the board voted to accept the amendment and to reject any immediate sale until a formal, public process could confirm valuation and intent. The vote was not unanimous, but it was sufficient. I signed the governance documents in the conference room as the sun set and the fluorescent factory lights clicked on one by one. Hands shook. Miguel clapped me on the shoulder. Rosa's eyes were wet but steady. George pressed his palm against my back. Marcus, George quietly, you did what Henry would have wanted. He didn't like the press, but he liked things that lasted. He would have argued with you and then backed you. George's words were plain and exactly what I needed. Elena folded her papers and put them in a file. We'll prepare to defend this in court if Calder sues, but you have the stronger case now. The notes, the witness statements, these add color to an estate's intent. We can delay a takeover and protect jobs while we iron out the legalities. Her voice had the steady rhythm of someone who plans for storms. The tension in me finally eased into a heavy relief. The emotional aftertaste was not triumph. It was the steady pressure of consequence. I had chosen to lose part of my compensation. I had chosen to accept a binding reduction of my vote. Those were practical losses I could calculate. They were not the same as a moral victory, but they preserved the plant and the people who worked inside it. That night I sat alone at Henry's desk. I had reached the chapter's last beat. I folded the old work shirt, the faded work shirt with the company logo Henry had used on the shop floor, and set it beside the leather watch. The watch had a thin scar across the band where a press had nicked it years earlier. My hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if each fold and placement named a decision. I placed the watch into the drawer with the ledger page on top of it. The drawer closed with a small clack. I felt the office air against my face. The lamp threw a pool of warm amber light over the desk, while the high windows kept a slice of teal from the city. The film, grain of memory, made the room look like a photograph. This was not a mood description, but the reality of light and dust and brass. I thought through the sequence of decisions that had led here. The hospital call, the payroll printout, the lawyer's sealed envelope that had started this chain, George's margin note, the assembly on the shop floor, Calder's attempt to rush us. Each event had pushed me to act. Each one had given me new information. I had done the arithmetic of sacrifice. I rose, slipped the key into the lock, and let the office go dark behind me. The factory night held the soft mechanical sounds of machines cooling and men talking in small groups. Outside the office, Rosa and Miguel compared notes about schedules. George was checking a crate with the foreman as practiced hands. Marcus, Rosa called quietly as I reached the hallway. We'll be here at 6 in the morning. The crew will be ready. Thank you. She did not wait for a flourish. She gave me a small, straightforward nod. I answered, Rosa. We'll start at 6. Bring the list. The words were practical instructions to keep the plant running. I stepped out into the yard. The lamps cut pools of light across asphalt. The city beyond showed a ribbon of traffic and lit windows. I kept walking without turning back. The choice I had made was not an end of the story. It was a set of actions anchored in paper and signatures and witness statements. It would meet lawyers and courtrooms, but it would also buy time for the people who needed paychecks. At the gate, Elena caught up to me. She looked at me with a fatigue that matched mine. You did the right work, she said. We gave them the breathing room to prepare a defense. Calder may fight, but he will not get an immediate handover. Her voice contained the tactical relief of someone who had closed a loop. I met her eyes and felt no grand epiphany. I felt the steady certainty of a practical choice. Elena, file everything you need. George will get witness affidavits. Miguel will pull payroll history. Rosa will meet with the crew at 6. I listed the actions like a man completing a checklist. The actions were how I honored a memory. Elena nodded and left toward her car. George and Miguel gathered papers by the fence. Rosa wiped her palms on a rag and looked toward the gate as if measuring morning. The night would turn into a morning of work and legal filings. The sequence was a chain of concrete tasks, not a speech. I walked back to the office and turned once to look at the darkened windows where Henry's desk sat. The building kept its breathing. I thought of the ledger and the note and the watch. I thought of the times Henry had corrected a payroll error by taking a page and writing a margin note. The way he had written small commands in the ledger when he wanted something to last. Those were not metaphors, they were actions that had consequences. I locked Henry's office and slid the key into my pocket. The watch's leather rubbed against the coin in my pocket, a tiny, private rhythm. My steps carried me out past the loading bay where the containers stood like silent evidence of today's choice. When I reached my car, I leaned against the hood for a moment, palms flat on the metal, and let my shoulders drop. The H in my chest was not poetic. It was the measured recoil of someone who had chosen what to hold and what to give. I closed the car door, started the engine, and drove toward home through the city lights. I had not solved every legal problem. Calder might sue. The board might change. But the immediate threat of an abrupt sale had been countered by a document, witness testimony, and a public commitment. The workers would report at 6, and the payroll would continue for now. At home, I took the watch from my pocket and cleaned it with my thumb until the leather gleamed. I set it on the nightstand beside my keys. I did not write a speech or leave a note. I had signed and filed and chosen. The chapter closed on the concrete action of folding the shirt, sliding the watch into the drawer, and switching off the lamp. I left the office slight dark and stepped into the morning that would come when we all returned to work. The real final action was simple and concrete. I closed the office door behind me and locked it. That click was the end of a contained decision. The company would face legal battles. I would take less pay. The workforce would keep its jobs for now. The ledger and the note would be called into court if needed. Those were facts that could be defended. I drove away thinking of nothing grander than schedules, filings, and the sound of a press starting on time. I had chosen a course. I had paid a cost. That was the legacy I could carry forward.